June 14th, 2026. The White House lawn was turned into a live combat sports arena for an event called Freedom 250. Thousands of guests filled the space. Joe Rogan was in the ring conducting interviews. President Donald Trump sat in the audience watching. A fighter named Josh Barnett won his bout. Standing under the lights with cameras rolling and the President of the United States looking on, he delivered a line that cut through the celebration. "Michelle Obama is a man. Am I right, America?" It was a cruel, baseless, and transphobic claim made about a private citizen on White House grounds during an official event. This was not a random internet comment buried in a forum. It happened in front of the sitting president on property controlled by the executive branch, with national media broadcasting every single word live to millions of homes across the globe. And then, absolute silence. No one pulled the microphone. No one cut the feed. Donald Trump did not flinch. The crowd erupted into a mix of awkward cheers and stunned silence, but on the lawn of the most powerful house in the world, the moment was allowed to hang in the air like a stain. When CNN's Jake Tapper later pressed White House Communications Director Stephen Chung for an official response, the political world braced for impact. Would they issue an apology, a mild disavowal, a statement on basic decorum? The entire official answer was exactly 4 words. He had a great win last night. 4 words. No condemnation, no clarification, no defense of a former First Lady of the United States, just a cold, dismissive redirect to a sports result. Think about that for a second. A sitting presidential administration, handed a direct test of institutional decency on a silver platter, chose to answer a vicious personal attack with a thumbs up to the guy who said it. Even prominent voices on the right were visibly shaken by the sheer recklessness of the moment. Barstool Sports founder Dave Portnoy immediately took to social media to publicly condemn the remark, calling it completely out of line. UFC President Dana White, a die-hard Trump supporter who helped orchestrate the event, openly admitted that he hated that kind of nonsense leaking into the sport. For a brief, flickering moment, it looked like a fundamental test of human decency. And the White House failed that test in real time, on the record, for the entire world to see. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably waiting for the explosive clapback. You're expecting the furious press releases, the emergency cable news interviews, the trending hashtags demanding a boycott. That is how modern American politics works, right? Action, outrage, counterattack. But in the days that followed, Michelle Obama did not issue a public statement. She did not tweet. She did not trend the insult. She did not demand an apology on social media. She didn't send out a fundraising email capitalized in all caps. She stayed completely, totally quiet. Why? Because she wasn't ignoring what happened. She was waiting for a completely different stage. Fast forward 96 hours, June 18th, 2026. 4 days after the UFC fight, the atmosphere shifted from the sun-drenched combat arena on the White House lawn to a massive, pristine courtyard in Chicago. The Barack Obama Presidential Center was officially opening its doors. The ceremony was nationally broadcast, meticulously choreographed, and packed with political royalty. Former Presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Joe Biden sat side by side with their respective First Ladies. World leaders, high-ranking diplomats, and legendary artists filled the seats. Cameras from every major network on the planet were locked onto the podium. The vibe was deliberate. It was formal, civic, and intentionally elevated, focused strictly on historic legacy rather than the mudslinging of current political combat. Then, Michelle Obama stepped to the podium. The room went dead silent. Millions watching at home held their breath. Everyone in that audience, every reporter in the press pen, and every staffer watching the monitors inside the West Wing knew what had happened 4 days earlier. They were waiting to see if she would take the bait. Would she throw a punch back? Would she name the fighter? Would she call out the White House? Michelle Obama adjusted her notes, looked out over the crowd, and began to speak about her husband's record and character. And then came the first masterstroke. She never said Donald Trump's name, not once, not a single time in the entire speech. Instead of stooping to the fight on the lawn, she began building a psychological mirror. She described Barack Obama as unflappable at every turn. She spoke of a man who remained deeply focused when the external pressure increased to unbearable levels. A man who stayed unnaturally calm when others expected him to break, react, or throw a tantrum. A man who consistently looked at the long view of history instead of getting dragged into the daily cycle of cheap outrage and instant response. And then, she delivered the observation that many veteran journalists covering the event would later call the hardest-hitting moment of modern political rhetoric. With a smooth, measured cadence, she asked the audience to reflect on her husband's 8 years in office. She noted how absurd, how utterly unthinkable, it would be to even imagine that Barack Obama might have buckled under pressure even once, that he might have lost his composure, that he might have lashed out in petty frustration on a public stage, that he might have lost his temper in front of the nation. Look at what she did there. She did not name the current president. She did not describe the UFC event. She did not reference the four-word White House response. She simply held up a pristine standard of presidential conduct and then stepped back, allowing the public to place recent events directly next to it. She didn't need to make an accusation. The structure of the speech did the psychological work that direct accusations usually fail to accomplish. When you attack someone directly, their supporters build a wall. They get defensive. They stop listening. But when you refuse to say the name, you force the listener's brain to complete the comparison themselves. The entire room felt the shift instantly. Years of erratic public behavior, late-night social media rants, and official White House silence sat quietly beside the image of the steady, composed leader she was describing. No further explanation was required. The contrast was blinding. Michelle Obama then smoothly transitioned into the concrete, undeniable record of the Obama administration. She spoke about the massive expansion of healthcare access for tens of millions of Americans. She spoke about navigating the end of a foreign war. She spoke about the high-stakes, nerve-wracking covert operation that located and eliminated Osama bin Laden. She spoke about saving the American auto industry from total collapse during a global financial crisis. And then, she mentioned the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, if you know anything about recent political history, you know that this specific item carried a nuclear charge in that room. For nearly a decade, Donald Trump has spoken openly, repeatedly, and obsessively about his desire to receive a Nobel Peace Prize. He has complained about not getting one at rallies, in interviews, and during international summits. He has publicly questioned why his predecessors received it while he was passed over. The closest Trump ever came to that honor was a strange moment in 2025 when a visiting foreign Nobel laureate handed him a physical medal as a personal token. The Norwegian Nobel Institute was forced to issue an immediate public clarification, explicitly reminding the world that the title, the honor, and the actual prestige of a Nobel Peace Prize cannot be transferred or handed out as a gift. It has to be earned. So when Michelle Obama casually uttered the words "winning a peace prize," the reaction inside the Chicago crowd was instant and electrical. A sudden wave of thunderous applause broke out across the audience. The cameras caught something extraordinary happening in the front row. Hillary Clinton leaned over toward Barack Obama, whispering a short, private remark directly into his ear. Whatever she said caused the former president to break into an uncharacteristic beaming grin, while the applause continued to swell around them. Within hours, that 5-second clip of Hillary whispering and Barack smiling was ripping through social media feeds at warp speed. Millions of views, tens of thousands of retweets. One of the most widely shared posts simply read, "Hillary Clinton especially enjoyed the Peace Prize line. Notice the discipline." Michelle never turned the speech into a direct attack. She didn't point a finger. She didn't list Trump's failures. She simply described a standard of leadership marked by restraint, calm, and international respect. And she let the events of the White House lawn sit right beside it without another word. The sheer power of the moment came entirely from the restraint of her delivery. By refusing to name the target, she kept the focus entirely on the standard itself, and the audience was left to do all the heavy lifting. You see, Michelle Obama's public voice possesses a specific kind of cultural force that almost no other living figure in American politics can replicate. She is not just a former First Lady showing up to drop occasional commentary on cable news. Over more than a decade, she has quietly built one of the most durable, broadly trusted platforms in modern history. Her memoir, Becoming, didn't just sell well, it became one of the best-selling books of the entire 21st century. Her podcast routinely draws massive global audiences because people know her observations carry real weight. Year after year, independent global polls consistently rank her as one of the most admired women on Earth, drawing respect from a surprisingly wide spectrum of people who usually disagree on everything else. That existing reservoir of public trust is the exact reason a speech that never once mentions Donald Trump can hit harder than 1,000 direct insults. Audiences have learned over years of watching her that when she selects her words with that level of surgical precision, every single syllable is intentional. She doesn't need to raise her voice. She doesn't need to scream. The contrast she constructs does the destruction all on its own. In the days that followed the Chicago event, Michelle kept speaking in that exact same elevated register. During subsequent appearances, she expanded on what her husband had represented: a mature president, a highly intelligent president, a selfless president. She noted that the profound sense of hope and national stability that millions felt during those years was directly linked to the actual character of the person sitting behind the resolute desk. Then she widened the lens, asking the country a fundamental question: what kind of human being do we want representing us to the world in the future? This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a masterclass strategy she had been executing for years. On her podcast earlier in the election cycle, she laid out a structural truth about double standards that became one of the most quoted political insights of the era. She plainly stated that the level of repeated scandal, chaos, and institutional failure that is regularly tolerated in modern politics would never have been accepted if it had come from the first black family in the White House. Every standard would have been higher. Every microscopic error would have been weaponized. The rules, she pointed out, were blatantly unequal. Yet even when exposing deep systemic unfairness, she consistently chose careful, devastating observation over personal combat. That single choice kept the public's attention firmly fixed on the massive gap in standards, rather than letting it devolve into a petty, two-sided political feud. She systematically refused to lower herself into the daily gutter of political mudslinging. She never said his name. She didn't have to. Think about the sheer contrast of those 4 days in June 2026. On June 14th, a fighter stands on the White House lawn and shouts a crude, transphobic insult about a private citizen into a microphone. The administration responds to the disrespect with a 4-word brush-off, treating basic human decency as irrelevant. 4 days later, Michelle Obama stands on a global stage in Chicago and delivers a masterclass on presidential composure, maturity, and historical legacy. She did it while the memory of the White House's official silence was still fresh in the minds of the nation. The crowd in Chicago understood the subtext instantly. The internet understood it instantly. Two completely different philosophies of leadership had been placed side by side on national television in less than 96 hours, and the difference was so stark that nobody needed a diagram to see it. It wasn't a scripted TV drama. It wasn't a staged stunt. It was a raw, real-time contrast between two vastly different definitions of power. One side answered cruelty with a sports score, the other answered silence with a standard of character. In the hours after Michelle Obama stepped off that stage in Chicago, the clip of her speech began moving across the internet faster than almost any political moment in recent memory. It didn't rely on explosive sound bites or theatrical outrage. Yet the quiet, undeniable contrast she had drawn invaded group chats, social media feeds, and cable news broadcasts with terrifying speed. The Peace Prize line, the description of a leader who refuses to buckle or lash out, and the deliberate, cold decision to omit Trump's name entirely fused into something far more dangerous to the administration than a standard political attack. By the next morning, the White House was caught in a trap of its own making. They still hadn't issued an official statement regarding the fighter's comment on the lawn. That 4-word line, "He had a great win last night," was still the only official record of their stance. And now, that dismissive 4-word quote sat side by side on split screens across every major news network, directly opposite Michelle Obama describing what a real leader looks like under pressure. Inside the West Wing, the mood was tense, uncomfortable, and deeply reactive. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, President Trump had watched the clip himself. He had seen the crowd's reaction. He had watched the exact moment Hillary Clinton leaned over to whisper to Barack Obama, and he saw the former president smile. What bothered him most, according to insiders, wasn't any policy claim. It was the fact that she had systematically dismantled his style of leadership without ever giving him the satisfaction of saying his name. There was no direct quote to label fake news. There was no explicit insult to counter-tweet. There was no personal slime to toss back. She had delivered the blow in the form of an ideal standard, and how do you fight back against a standard without looking like you're fighting against decency itself? Later that same day, Trump addressed a private gathering of supporters in Florida. The frustration was evident. He didn't mention Michelle Obama by name either, but he spent several minutes railing against coastal elites who think they're better than everyone else, and people who give lofty speeches about character while the country goes to hell. He pivoted back to his classic talking points: the 2015 Iran deal, the supposed weakness of the Obama era, the unfairness of the media. The audience clapped, but the energy was visibly off. The punch lacked its usual sting. The Chicago speech had already consumed the oxygen in the media cycle, and Trump's response sounded like a defensive reaction to an argument that had never explicitly named him. Over on cable news, network producers played the two events on perpetual loop. On the left half of the screen, a fighter hurling insults on the White House lawn while the administration looks away. On the right half, Michelle Obama speaking calmly about dignity, focus, and restraint.